Hello, everybody. Thanks for checking out the newest show from TavernTCG, The Competitive Mindset. In this show, we're going to be interviewing the top players from the game all around the world, and we want to see what makes them tick. My name is Kyle Van Vorst. I'm the owner of TavernTCG, and I'm here with your very own Carlos Robledo from Source of Will. Carlos, how are you doing?
Good night, Kyle. How are you doing today? I'm doing all right. For anybody who maybe watched Source of Will or new to the what Tavern brings you, I think that whether you're a new player or a seasoned veteran, I hope that these conversations that we're going to do with players become useful to any player hoping to become a pro in the Source of Will competitive scene. However, being in the competitive mindset really should be applicable to any game like Force of Will or any other card game as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I've learned from being around competitive players so often is it truly is a mindset. It's something different. They think differently. They look at the game differently. And I think the number one challenge that players who want to jump into the competitive scene have is, of course, what do I do to win? How do you play on a competitive level? It's a different way of thinking, that's for sure. Now, of course, you can see him in the bottom right there. We have a very special guest. His video doesn't work because he broke his laptop. What better way to introduce my good friend, Team Tavern player, Quinn Kotecki. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Kind of disappointed that I can't see everybody and let them see me.
That's okay. That's okay. I think you're doing us all a service by keeping the visuals to a minimum, so I appreciate it.
I don't know what you're trying to insinuate, but I don't appreciate it.
Okay, so cool. I'm excited. Quinn was the first guy after Brian Liu. For those of you who don't know, background real quick. Team Tavern started with Brian Liu all the way back in season 1 in LA, and Quinn was the second guy we picked up. And it was kind of funny because we were, I wanted to have Quinn join the team for a long time. We kept going back and forth. I think I forgot to respond to him once or twice. And we eventually were able to connect and get everything worked out. So first thing, Quinn, I want to talk to you a little bit about your background in TCGs, and then we're going to dive into Force of Will and your performance there. So just give us a rundown. Tell us about the other TCGs you played and how that went.
Got it. Well, it all started early elementary school when the Pokemon card game was a thing. Like every other kid got into that, and every Saturday the local Toys R Us would have Pokemon tournaments, and they would have 8 people set up who were better at the game than all of us little kids, and they were the gym leaders. So we would kind of like line up and duel them, and if we won, then they would give us little gym badges, and that was phenomenal. We just felt like tiny little just badasses. And then in 2001 when Yu-Gi-Oh came out, I was like, oh yeah, I definitely have to get into this. So hopped into Yu-Gi-Oh, and I played that until 2011. Racked up a couple of YCS tops, Nats tops, a couple of wins here and there. And a couple of my buddies were like, hey, we play this game called Magic. I was like, there's no way it's better than Yu-Gi-Oh. Well, I played Magic like 3 times, and I was like, this is so much better than Yu-Gi-Oh! So I just kind of jumped over to Magic, started in the new Phyrexia era. First deck I made was Infect, followed by Splinter Twin, and it just went on from there. A couple of SCG tops, a couple of PTQ wins, all kinds of other stuff. And then in February, went to my local game store. And my friend Amanda was like, hey, you have to check out this game, Force of Will. The art looks really cool. So I looked at it. I was like, how does it play? She's like, I like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh combined. A little bit of Hearthstone. I was like, well, let's sit down and play. So I did, and the rest is history.
Wow, that's crazy. It's funny. I think a lot of people, because you're not the first person to tell me about Toys R Us being in the first place that they started. So it's interesting that so many people started at Toys R Us. Do they still do events? Carlos, do you know?
No, as far as I know, they do not. But they definitely still have the card game presence there. I know that I'm friends with a bunch of local game store owners, and they're always miffed because Toys R Us seems to be getting all their product a day early, or at least they put it on shelves when they shouldn't. So Toys R Us at least breaks some street dates.
That's kind of cool. They're like the now like the renegade store,
I guess so.
I like that. Breaking the rules of the TCG.
Yeah, well, can't mess with the 500-pound gorilla, right?
Yeah, good luck. I'm very hard to knock down. So let's go into the next thing here. So like one of the big things that Carlos and I were talking about this a little while ago. So there's a point in a player's, I don't know what you want to call it, career. I feel like it's a strong word. There's a point in a player's run where they actually make a conscious decision that they want to play competitively. I think everyone jumps in and they want to start playing competitively. At least what competitive is in their mind. But there becomes a point where they actually open themselves up for criticism and they're like, hey, I want to get good at this. Where was that for you, or were you just always good at it?
I don't. I can't tell you if I was always good because everybody's pretty much the same when you first start off. Just tabletop gaming. But I don't think I really hit the competitive scene for card games until roughly high school for Yu-Gi-Oh! Because every Saturday, my local store had like Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments. So me and my buddy, we would pack up our skateboards and we would just like skate like 8 miles to the card shop and make sure we got there in time. And after like watching other people play, you just kind of pick up little things here and there. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm starting to get kind of good. And then I got in with a group of guys and they're like, hey, we're going to a tournament that's like, an hour away in Charlotte. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And well, you always have those tournament jitters at first. But
Right.
After that, I'm like, man, you're telling me that I can play this game that I really like. And if I'm good enough, I can get paid to do it or, get free cards to do it. Well, sure, why not? And then my competitive spirit from like video gaming kind of carried into card gaming, and it just all went downhill from there.
Jeez. So so you've been doing card games forever. What's your well, I know it, but I'm going to ask for everyone else's sake. Force of Will. What have you done in Force of Will so far? Give us a quick rundown.
I took top 8 in WGP Chicago. I was the only person to go undefeated in Swiss. And then in top 8, I played against Brandon, who squeaked in by literally, I think it was 0.1%.
Oh.
And his Shahrazad deck just mopped the floor with Odd Grow. I mean, I opened up really non-aggro-y, but he played it perfect, and I had no answer for 1001 Stories. So that happens. So I lost to the guy that won the whole thing. And then I took top 8 in Houston, and in top 8 I played against Anton, who, as we know, ended up going to Worlds.
Right.
And it came down to a die roll. We were both playing Baja, and game 1 he mops the floor with me. Game 2 I just obliterate him, and then game 3 he sees more regalia than I do. And that's all there was to that. And then I've also had 2 ARG wins, 2 ARG top 8s, an ARG top 4, and then top 4 at States.
Yeah, so every event Quinn goes to, you just top.
I try and set top 8 as a minimum standard for me. If I don't get top 8, then I feel like I did something wrong.
Yeah, now tell me more about that. So when you say you think you did something wrong, where's the first place you go to evaluate after an event, whether you win or lose?
I look at my deck choice in the whole field. So if there's 300 people playing, and I'm the only person playing X deck, and everybody else is on this, I'm like, oh, well, I guess maybe I should have potentially been on that instead. But if I am playing one of the top tier decks, then I look at after a match, I'm like, all right, well, I see that I could have done this. Should I have done this instead? And then I just I think back and I'll make little notes and I'll just kind of evaluate my plays and go over it in my head saying, well, was this the right thing to mulligan? Was this the right thing to play at this time? Should I attack to force a block here? And I'll just kind of nitpick myself. And then after that, I'll go to other people and be like, hey, what did you see that I could have done? And then after I ask my opponent, then I'll go to my teammates and be like, hey, what do you guys think? I mean, is this not right? Should I sideboard this instead? And just things like that. So I start from the inside, and then I work my way out.
Interesting. Carlos, you I know you play competitively a lot. Fill me in on that as well. Do you have a similar process? How do you go about it?
Yeah, kind of similar, like Quinn said. I mean, I think like my first, like let's take Force of Will States for example. I went in there, having play tested with Zach the night before, and I actually decided to go on a different deck just because I felt more comfortable with it. And I was the only one playing Rezard that day, and I didn't top 8. I lost my win and in. But there's also the other side of that coin, which is if you're the only one playing a deck, especially if you not if you designed it yourself, but if you really tuned it, it is possible that everybody's like, oh, I'm gonna go play Blazer this weekend. And we see that in Magic a lot too. Like let's say we have a Pro Tour the weekend before and like mono red tops, so like you can start expecting a lot of mono red the next weekend, so you can start adjusting your deck or either your deck choice or your sideboard choice for that expectation. And sometimes it can bite you, when things don't go as you expected. But we have been able to identify some patterns. There's some things you'll see time and time again, where players will, they will always gravitate, they will always net deck in this day and age anyway. So you know what to go for that next weekend. So I went into that States expecting a lot of, knowing the local meta here, expecting a lot of 28 Regalia. So, mainboarding 4 Death Side seemed pretty sweet. So that ended up pretty well. So it wasn't exactly the wrong choice, but I probably should have been at that time on that, Adam Reisner's at Arla list. I think I would have gotten farther with it. So.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So that actually brings me up to a different point because we talked about net decking and everyone has their opinion. Personally, I'm not against it. If you're going to copy someone else's deck, it's totally fine. I think it's great for players who may not be as good as deck building yet and gives them a good starting ground, and they can make changes as they see fit. So I'm not against net decking by any means. That being said, there is a component of deck building in any event where sometimes it might not be the best choice to pick, whatever deck's doing the most, doing the most at whatever given time. So I know Brian Liu, for example, whenever he wants, whenever we're looking at a meta, him and I talk about it a lot, what we'll see is we'll see what the decks are and is there something else. So we're always looking for the other. Now, Quinn, for you, when you go about building, and it looks like my video just cut off here.
Yep.
I'm going to try to fix that. But when you're going about building a deck for an event, and you're looking at the meta and you're trying to do some analysis, there's going to be net decking, all that stuff. Are you taking what has worked in the past, or are you like kind of starting fresh every time?
I do a little bit of both. The times where I start fresh is definitely with a brand new set. I'll try and cook up something that I think might work. Other times I'll look at, the top X amount of decks and see which ones have been getting the most popularity, how they work. And if I think, for instance, that somebody's going to gun for, Adam's Arla list, then I'm going to be like, okay, well, I'm clearly not going to play that because people are going to anticipate it.
Yep.
I'm not going to play 28 Regalia because people are going to be all over Blazer Death Scythe. So, I find something, and if I know it's good, but it's low on the radar, then I'll kind of take that slight percentage chance to be a little more sneaky and still potentially get there.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a time where you'll have, at least I think Force of Will is now mature enough to where we're not going to have an environment where it's going to be a tier 0 deck format, at least. It might happen, but hopefully it'll get corrected easy. So, I mean, you will lose. Your deck, no matter how good you are, I think, you will not be able to build a deck that will win versus everything. So you got to analyze the field, and it is hedge betting. You're betting on which decks are going to be the most prevalent, and you're hoping to pick a deck that will prey on those decks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't As you said, there's no such thing as like the perfect deck. Everything is going to lose to something, but it definitely helps to find that one deck that has better matchups against more things than less things. I would rather play a deck. Let's see. Let's say there's 10 really good decks in a format. I would rather play one deck that's good against 6 of those than the one deck that beats the deck that's good against 6 of those. So I'd rather play a deck that's good against a variety than the one deck that beats the deck that's against the variety.
Right. Yeah, it's really complicated too. There comes a certain point when you're playing on a competitive level and you're going to a large event. How many rounds are we playing? What do you think the breakdown of the meta is? These are all conversations I feel like are standard when you're talking about competitive play, and you need a deck that'll go the distance. So consistency is insanely important. The next, actually, this is something I think might be interesting, is the mulligan. I hear from a lot of people that the mulligan is a really important part of the game, and it kind of is the first obstacle that a player has to overcome in order to really be competitive or really be able to set themselves in the right position to win the match. What do you think about that, Quinn? About the whole mulligan thing?
Mulligans are definitely important. In Force of Will, I think they're a little less important, as in games like Magic, where when you mulligan, you actually lose card advantage, and you have to get rid of everything. In Force of Will, it's definitely a lot easier to choose what you mulligan because you can do partial pairs. So, if I'm playing an aggressive deck and I open up with two one-drops
when you're
or a
playing on a
one-drop and a
competitive
two-drop, I'm
level,
like, cool,
and
I
you're going
can get rid of these other cards that are late game or just, tech cards that aren't useful right now.
Right.
And they just go on the bottom, and I just draw right from the top. But that being said, it's not always as cut and dry as just that. A lot of times, I'll open up and I'll have, for instance, when I was playing Bahamut in Houston, if I open up and I've got, 2 Percys, a Guinevere, a Rook Egg, and a Cthulhu, do I need to keep both of those Percys? Do I need to keep one of the Percys? It gets really tricky when certain people look at the hand, they're like, man, this hand is just the nuts. And you're like, well, yes, it is good, but is it overly good?
Right.
Because when I was playing at States, I was playing a deck that ran Guinevere, and I opened up with 3 Guineveres in my hand. I was like, well, I know this card is not bad, but do I really need to keep all 3?
Right.
And the answer for me was no. I was like, I don't know what I'm playing against, but 3 Guineveres is just bad because I can play her, but she's not bad because if she survives the turn, then she's just advantage. But is that really what I want to do with my first 1, 2, and 3 potential turns? Is only play Guinevere? Well, the answer is no. So I shipped 2 to the bottom, kept 1, and sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. I could have potentially only pitched 1, but I said to pitch 2 because I know there's still 1 more in the deck. With Rook Eggs, I can, shuffle the deck, so it's not like they're going to be stuck at the bottom forever.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say that you brought it until the rise of the Rook Egg recently. We actually had no way to. I guess a Cheshire Cat could shuffle, but the shuffle effects were actually very few and far between. So if you were playing a deck with like 1 Gilderay, for example, and it was in your opening hand and you shipped it away, it was very possible that you'll never see it again. So, but now with Rook Egg and a few other shuffle effects are more prevalent, then that's not a big of an issue. But I mean, if you're playing a deck that does not have those elements, do keep that in mind when you do your mulligans at the beginning.
Oh yeah, for sure. You definitely have to keep those things in mind. But I mean, Rook Egg is just broken. But I mean, if I'm playing something like Bahamut and I only play 1 Gilderay in my deck, well, who cares if I ship it back because Bahamut can search for it, late game. I mean, there's other little things like that you just have to take into consideration. There have been times where when I was testing Adam's Arla list and I open up with a couple of Little Dreads in my hand, I'm like, I'm not going to cast this until turn 5.
Right.
Turn 3 if I really need a board presence. But, I mean, sometimes like that, it's never bad to keep certain things like that in your hand just so you have a later game play already in your hand.
Right.
And especially going into games 2 and 3, you have an anticipation of what you're playing against, of what you might need, And for example, I went to an ARG, and when I was playing with 28 Regalia, I sideboarded in 2 Breath of the Gods. And if I ever saw one of those in my opening hand, I always kept it. If I saw 2 in my opening hand, I just kept them. Because there are certain cards like that will always come in handy.
Right. Yeah, that changes as you go into the game 2 of the match or even game 3. What to keep and what to throw away. It's important. I think it's important. It's good to have a plan, and when you don't know what you're playing against, you're gonna mulligan differently. Obviously, another topic that this kind of shimmies me into, since we're talking so much about it's the shuffling of the deck. I mean, obviously, Rook Egg is huge for red. Being able to search out whatever you need is just insane. Guinevere as well. Bringing to the topic of the decks of the format, right? So we're seeing a lot of There's a lot of different decks coming out right now that are kind of getting hyped up and people are talking about. To use the question, if you're going into an event like we have ARG down here in LA on Sunday, when you're going into an event and you see all these decks getting blown up, people talking about these strange, these weird Vlad decks, these weird Grim decks, how do you separate the ones that are actually good from the ones that just might be overhyped?
You actually have to kind of delve in and look at the deck. Like I might need to separate it and look at everything and be like, all right, these are your win conditions, these are your answers, these are your tech cards. If I can count 3 to 4 win conditions with Vlad not being one of them, then that's a check. If you have answers to certain things in the meta, like if you have spot removal, if you have counters, if you have things that actually answer or can get past the top decks in the meta or the format, well, then you might be able to do it. Because a deck that a lot of people have been talking about is the Yamada combo.
Right.
And when I think about that right now, I kind of like it. Because if you think about it, and most of the decks are red, white, stuff like that, things that don't play counters. So against aggro decks or against mid-rangey aggro decks, stuff like that, or against even Regalia, they have no way to interact with your draws. They have no way to interact with what you're going to play when you cast it. So I played Genesis Creation on turn 4 or something like that, and I bring Yamada back, and then I OTK you. It's definitely not awful in this meta at the time. Now, if somebody were trying to play that, back when Salt Dot deck was Yamada during Shahrazad and Abdul, well, then the deck is just way overhyped because it's new, it's fun, it's a combo, but it's in a meta that can easily interact with it and just shut it down. So you definitely have to look in depth. You have to see what they have, what they're trying to do, what they can do, and you just kind of go from there. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, look, Grimm's coming back." As much as I would love for Grimm to make a huge comeback, I've tried. He's to me definitely a tier 2. He can do cute things, but he can't keep up with the aggressive meta that we have right now. Let's see, there was Combo, there's Grimm, even Regalia when it first came out. It was hyped up so much because people had thought about it, but until they saw how degenerate it was,
right,
then, well, there was nothing you could do except lose to it. But then somebody's like, oh, hey, look, Blazer and Death Scythe are pretty good, and Flames of the Outer World is still a card. So I'm just going to cram all these things in a deck, and it's going to shut that down. And it did. And now when I look at 28 Regalia, I'm like, that deck's actually kind of garbage. Because I've played, I've played a couple of decks that just beat it down that don't even use Blazer or Death Scythe. So it's definitely easy to tell once somebody comes up with a way to beat a deck if it's overhyped or if it's actually good. Arla and Bahamut, people came up with decks to try and combat that, but look at it. They're still getting there. Right. That's the difference. So even when it's combated, it can still win and not just fold under the pressure.
So then where does Yamada fit in all this? Is this, Yamada combo, is that a deck that people should actually be afraid of, or is that the one that beats the one deck that beats 6, like we were talking about earlier?
I definitely see it being like it beats the aggressive decks. but you also have to remember that it is combo. So you have a less likely chance to get that combo off, whereas the aggressive decks are always going to be consistently aggressive. So if you hit a wrong stone one time, if you don't draw one combo piece, if somebody has a horn on the field, or they just happen to have a Zeeks in their hand, it's awful for you. So it's
Fetal
definitely
movement.
the one, yeah, fetal movement. That card's in every sideboard that I ever make that runs red. It's definitely, I think combo is the one deck that beats one or two, whereas Arla and things like that is the deck that beats six.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's the thing is when you're going to a large event, you're going to be playing a lot of rounds. You got to hedge your bets. You got to say, hey, look, what is my game against Yamada? I've talked a lot about Yamada with Steam, but also with Brian. And what do you bring? Well, Yamada, yeah, you may have an advantage turn one, but when people put horns, from their sideboard or fetal movement, all of a sudden it becomes a lot harder of a matchup. Horn. I like fetal movement for sure, but horn's free. I mean, a free card, it costs 0 in order to stop someone else's strategy or at least halt it. It's strong, man. It makes that game 2 and 3 very difficult.
It is, and if you're playing a deck where games 2 and 3 become so difficult that you almost can't win, or it lowers you below a 50% win rate, then that's also a sign of a bad deck. You don't want your deck to be so much worse after sideboard. Like, even if you sideboard in things, right, it should still keep the game at an even pace, or you're trying to put your percentage higher. If pre-sideboard your percentage is significantly lower, that might not be a deck that you want to be on, because you're going to play more game 2 and 3s than you're going to play game 1s.
Absolutely. I mean, what do you think, Carlos? What do you think about the meta going into this weekend? We have some events.
Well, I don't know. Like I said earlier, the big thing some players will do is look at what the current events. I don't know if you guys saw the Japan Open. I think was this last weekend. Yeah, there were what was like 5 Blazers, and so 1 Alice Saint. That's interesting. So that would be what I look at going into the next ones. Obviously Blazer continues to be big as a main board. There's many versions of Blazer though, so it's hard to prepare for any of them. But aggro will still be a force. But it's one of the, what is it now? That's the 18th, so even less than a month until we get new cards too. So I'm sure that might be another good point of conversation. Is what do competitive players do when a new set rolls out?
Yeah, that's a great question, Quinn. You've been through this a few times now. What insight do you have into that?
The easiest thing to do is to take the best decks pre-new set and see what new cards can be incorporated in that deck to make it better. You'll find, a lot of people will just try and make something completely brand new, and they're like, oh man, this seems really good. But then they go up against the older decks that have just, adopted some of the newer cards, and boom, there you go. I mean, you saw a little bit of Bahamut burn in the Grim meta, and then after that, you saw a lot of Bahamut during the A0 meta, right, and now you're still seeing some Bahamut in the A1 meta. And the reason that deck has still been around is because it took the cards that were good and it's adapted into every meta. There are still some cards, like I think Abdul could still potentially be good right now, because, if you flip him early enough, then, hey, okay, I'm just going to blank all of your aggressive dudes that have swiftness or flying, and then what are you going to do? It's going to slow you down. I'm still going to have spot removal. I'm going to throw a Mistopheles down, and I'm just going to kill you.
Right.
But a lot of people forget about old cards, and that's what happens. You can't forget about the old things, because it's the old things that will come back and bite you in the butt.
Right.
And when people realize, oh, hey, this card is still really good, then they're just like, yeah, let me toss it together with some of these newer cards, and now I have a really good deck.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I think the biggest problem, like let's just say, like the first event after the new set drops, that a lot of people have is what you're saying, is just trying to get too crazy with all the new cards. It's kind of like the 28 regalia thing, right? That was a lot of all the new regalia was in it. Turns out that the better decks are the ones that utilize more of the older cards than the newer one, at least A0 and before. When I think you could even argue that A0 is probably one of the most game-changing sets that they've come out with so far.
Oh, for sure. I can definitely agree with that. A0 having Egg, Lancelot, Guinevere, Excalibur, and Levitine, it completely changed the way that we play the game right now.
Oh, hands down. I mean, you just listing off the cards, my jaw drops. What was that, Carlos?
I said I agree.
Yeah, dude. Guinevere is such an insane card. It's so freaking good. That card is out of control, in my opinion.
No, it's amazing. I think that there are still some people that play Vlad Control, and there's that deck just wrecks a lot of things, but it has a harder time against the aggressive decks. And there's one card that I wish they had made at instant speed instead of non-instant speed that probably could have made control decks significantly better, and that's Blessing. Had they just made that a 1 and a green instant speed, then on my turn 2, I'll leave up 2 mana for a kill spell or a counter spell. If I don't have to use either one, I'll instant speed ramp, and then I'm going to play my fat dudes really soon. I'm going to drain you faster. So, I mean, when they print things like Guinevere or Lancelot or Lave, I'm thinking, why would you make all of these insanely good cards in the same color and in a dual deck, but when it comes to certain cards in packs, you can't, give us a little bit more? I mean, if you're going to power creep, you may as well power creep evenly.
Right. Yeah, and for those, you're talking about Blessing of, how do you pronounce this? Yggdrasil?
Yeah.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know what that does, you search your Magic Zone deck for a card, and you put it into your Magic Zone stone area rested, and then you shuffle it. Yeah, that was instant speed. It'd be out of control, for sure. That's really strong. Okay. Yeah, so as far as, I'm out of questions here for Quinn. Carlos, do you have anything before we close this down?
No, I think that's a pretty good episode 1.
Yeah, I think so too. Quinn, it was super fun having you on. I'm glad we were all able to do this. Everybody, make sure you like, comment, subscribe to our stuff. You guys all probably too at this point. We're all over the place. But let us know what kind of things you want to hear. We're gonna have some more players come on. Our other episodes. We're also gonna go overseas. I want to get some of the players from Singapore. I'd like to get some players from the UK on the show. So kind of keep tuning in. We're going to be talking to different players and kind of getting their opinion on the meta and that sort of thing. Quinn, I appreciate your time.
Oh, man, no problem. I appreciate you guys having me on here anytime.
Awesome. Well, everybody have a good one, and we'll see you next week.
Here we go. All right.